It's the week ending the 23rd of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've heard Theresa May's first speech on Brexit, marvelled as Boris Johnson compared Francois Hollande to a Nazi prison guard, and seen Barack Obama make his final moves as president before he moves out of the White House. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. The big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And with me today from the week's digital team are Jonathan Harwood, Rebecca Gillie and Holden Frith. And to start the show with his top pick of the week, it's Jonathan. What have you got for us?
Well, this week's probably going to be remembered for several big speeches, but the most important one might be not the most high-profile one.
Economic globalization was once viewed as the treasure cave found by Alibaba in the Arabian Nights. But now, it has become the Pandora's box in the eyes of many. The international community finds itself in a heated debate on economic globalization. So today I wish to address the global economy in the context of economic globalization.
Alibaba, Pandora's box, is like a particularly dry panto, isn't it? But that is the Chinese President Xi Jinping giving a speech at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos this week. Now, Jonathan, as you say, this has been a week of big speeches, certainly in the UK and the US. But you feel this one perhaps hasn't got the coverage it deserves?
Well, I think this one could turn out to be slightly more significant in the long run. Obviously, we know all about Brexit. Theresa May's just simply confirmed what we already expected to happen. Donald Trump, we all know about him as well. This is a sort of statement of intent from China that they've become the really rather unlikely poster boys for the globalization process. They're become heroes of Davos, which is happening this week. In a week that the West has kind of confirmed that it's pulling out of the globalization movement, China seems to be coming in and stealing the ground there.
But the West hasn't actually said we're pulling out of the globalisation movement. That's the implication of things like Brexit and Trump's protectionism. But, I mean, you know, they wouldn't recognise what you're saying, would they,
well,
Western
I mean,
leaders?
Donald Trump's been threatening taxes on imports to the US. Theresa May this morning described globalisation as aiding the politics of division and said it was making people fearful. Now, on the other hand, China are going in the opposite direction and saying it's time to keep your borders open, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Rebecca, do you think China is the new America?
Really, I think it's more a case, just from what I've read around it, of the West pulling back rather than China moving forward in any kind of significant way. I mean, most economists still seem to think that there are some fundamental weaknesses with the Chinese economy, which really is going to keep it from propelling itself into the West's spot.
So do you think Xi Jinping is coming out here to sort of make a statement in a rather sort of Trumpian way that isn't necessarily going to be backed up by anything actually happening in terms of China's role?
Yeah, I think I've seen quite a lot of news articles have come out that actually compare the two of them. Both of them have made big promises that they're going to rejuvenate the country and make it great again. So obviously they do, even though they're kind of taking opposite attitudes, it's for the same kind of end.
Holden.
No, even if there are nuances and there are reasons we shouldn't take these at face value, it is still remarkable that China seems to be the most liberal, open-bordered trading country of the major powers at the moment.
Well, except that when Xi Jinping says, without naming him, Trump's a protectionist and I'm not, he is when it comes to the internet, isn't he? No one's more protectionist than China when they say Google, Facebook, Twitter, bog off. That's
a very interesting point, because the metaphor that you mentioned, the Alibaba's cave and Pandora's box, that exact metaphor was made by China's internet chief called Lu Wei in 2014, when he used that to describe the internet. It could be Alibaba's cave, it could be Pandora's box, and obviously China's attitude towards the internet hasn't changed much since then.
Having just said it's most remarkable and most surprising thing, in a way we shouldn't be surprised about it. Again, like Theresa May's speech, where she said essentially what she's been saying all along, I think China has been shaping up to take on this sort of global capitalist role, although it's still nominally a communist state. Its form of communism is unrecognizable from the sort of 1917 Russian Revolution form. It's really it's kept all the authoritarian sides to it, but it's married them with a kind of state-controlled capitalism instead. It's a very commercialist form of communism.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? So if China is kind of half capitalism, half communism, and then America's going to be half capitalism, half protectionism, and Britain's going to be the same, then who is actually doing capitalism proper, as we would have recognised it 10 years ago? Germany.
But yes, although Germany also has an unusual form of capitalism to it. It's not protectionist in the sense of putting up trade barriers, but it likes to soften the sort of rougher edges of capitalism. So I expect the sort of red in tooth and claw form of capitalism is maybe places like Singapore, Hong Kong, maybe some of the Asian markets are the sort of last bastion of that kind of approach.
It's a 19th century concept, capitalism, isn't it? We're in the 21st century, so these ideologies are being redefined as we move along, and we're still looking at them through the prism of John Mills and Karl Marx and people like that.
But also, when it was felt that America really did sort of rule the world in these kind of terms, it was a really sexy place. It was an aspirational place for most people who weren't in the West. They wanted to be a bit like America. I'm not getting those vibes from China. I mean, if China is the centre of globalization, it's because they make stuff cheaply, frankly, isn't it? It's not because we all want to be Chinese. That's a shift, isn't it?
Yeah, because the American ideal kind of married the idea of free trade with other freedoms, freedom of speech, blah, 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 which obviously in China is not the case, which I think makes it even more difficult to predict how China is going to interact with the rest of the world in the future, because embracing free trade is not necessarily going to come in hand with embracing other freedoms, as Jonathan was saying earlier about the internet. That's kind of the intersection of cultural protectionism and economic protectionism.
And if we are seeing the end of the American order, then I really think we're going to miss it. I think, for all its imperfections of any kind of dominant political force, the American era has been the most benevolent, the least evil.
And the government were kind of criticised last year, weren't they, when Xi Jinping came over for his state visit and he got the full brown-nosed treatment, didn't he? I mean, he had the red carpet at Buckingham Palace, he had special audiences with the Prime Minister and all the rest of it. They were criticised for dealing with someone who has a dodgy record on human rights, etc., etc. That decision doesn't seem so foolhardy now, does it? It's good, isn't it, that we have the best possible relationship with China?
It could be lucrative, just as cozying up to Donald Trump could be lucrative. But I think it will raise the sort of questions that Rebecca's just been raising about how do we rank our economic well-being against ideas of liberty, free speech, and so on? Is it even up to us to suggest that China ought to change its domestic policy? The Western political view since the end of the Second World War has really been that it is our job to export wealth and liberty. I wonder if we're starting to see a bit of a change to that, and I wonder if China's positioning of itself and the Chinese president's speech is actually an attempt to kind of hurry that along and say, look, we certainly want to be more engaged with the world, but we want to be more engaged with the world on our terms, and it's maybe your turn to start listening to us rather than the other way around.
If the globe is to continue, the world economy is to continue expanding, then someone's going to have to push it along. And I think that's where China see an opportunity, not just for their own production. They need a market for. They're producing ever increasing amounts of things. They need people to buy those things, so they need a global market for that. And I think that's where they see an opportunity culturally there too.
And Jonathan, you're the sports editor for theweek.co.uk, and when it comes to China and your area of interest, are you seeing evidence of what you just said as well, that they're trying to sort of set the price?
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, the main sports story over the last few days has been the Diego Costa saga at Chelsea. He's been offered £30 million a year to play in the Chinese Super League, which is a preposterous amount of money. The Chinese clubs have been absolutely swooping in over Europe. Up until now, they've been taking the elderly players. It's a bit like a retirement home, but they're starting to take bigger and bigger names at younger and younger age and offer them more and more money. And actually, it's interesting as to sort of. You can see how it's occurred. The Chinese government said a few years ago they wanted to increase participation and become a football superpower. And obviously when a Chinese government says something, the Chinese billionaires take note. And suddenly they are now throwing lots of money at the West and bringing footballers in order to appease their government.
Okay. Jonathan, master of the podcast, thank you for that. Rebecca, you're next. What's your story of the week?
This is a musical composer getting reception that Andrew Lloyd Webber could only dream of.
There's someone here tonight that should be at the Golden Globes, but is actually here. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't believe I'm doing this. Please join me in welcoming Lin-Manuel to the stage.
Wow, that is the creator of the Pulitzer Prize-winning show, Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda, making a surprise appearance at the closing night in London of his other musical, In the Heights. Anyone seen In the Heights?
I've seen it twice.
Have you seen it twice?
Yeah.
I thought 4 stars, as far as I'm concerned. Good dancing, good rapping. Bit sort of down the middle, wasn't it? Really?
4 stars, but the woman who played the mother, the taxi company mother, was a 10 out of 5-star performance.
Okay, I think I saw her understudy. Maybe that was the extra
that
star.
probably knocked off the extra star.
Anyway, really, this is a story about Hamilton, isn't it? The incredible success that show has had on Broadway, and Lin-Manuel Miranda becoming this kind of global celebrity figure now. Heard the audience there watching a West End musical, screaming at its creator coming on stage. That's unusual, but why have you chosen this story? So
tickets for Hamilton went on sale this week for the West End transfer, which is coming in November. This was for the priority booking, so for people who pre-registered, and 100,000 people pre-registered. We don't know yet how many of those people booked, but we do know that the Ticketmaster website went down several times, and that Twitter was completely swamped with people stressing out over whether they were going to be able to secure their tickets and celebrating when they did. Yeah, you do wonder how reflective that is, though, because we do talk a lot about the kind of liberal echo chamber, don't we? And on a Venn diagram of Twitter users and Hamilton registers, I reckon that's quite a big crossover. It's true that obviously it's probably a limited demographic of people who are dominating the Twitter discourse around Hamilton, but it has been a regular in the UK iTunes top 10. The soundtrack has been in the top 10 for several months now. Yeah, which I personally make a policy with musicals never to listen to the songs before I go and see the show. Yeah, but it helps that it's sung through, so you get the whole... You're not missing out on the story. I want to see the story firsthand. It's a musical about Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers in the US. It's in a very non-traditional style. It draws from lots of styles, including hip-hop, R&B, rap music generally. Barack and Michelle Obama are fans. It's kind of become the place to be seen in New York. Tickets have been resold online for thousands and thousands of dollars. It's also become a bit of a political statement. Mike Pence was booed when he watched a production on Broadway recently. So yeah, it's coming to London, and it has this huge following. And it's not the first of these kind of rock star productions that we've seen. Obviously, there was a similar but slightly lesser furore over Book of Mormon when that opened. And Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, obviously not a musical, but had a very similar kind of booking fervour. 175,000 people booked tickets in priority booking with a waiting list of months. Why do you think it is we are seeing suddenly sort of the London West End being seen as a hot property when it's kind of doing the same thing it's always done? It's come in tandem with another development, which is the traditional musical, is it on its way out? In the sense that Showboat made a initially very successful transfer from the Sheffield Crucible last year, but it closed unexpectedly early. I went to see it, and it was probably about half full. Yeah, it was a really excellent production, and Showboat was written, I think, in 1919, 1920. It was one of the original musicals that was, before then musicals were really just a collection of songs and dances put together. That was one of the first musicals that really told a story. And the fact that it got such a lukewarm reception made me wonder, what is the future for the more traditional musicals, ones that aren't based on the hits of a popular band, the ones that aren't adaptations of a film, which is really what dominates the West End at the moment. Shows like Thriller, Beautiful, the Carole King musical, Sunny Afternoon, closed recently. I think producers are now recoursing to shows that are going to be seen as reliable money makers. Shrek the musical, Elf, which sold for something like £200 a ticket, premium, to see a musical adaptation of Elf.
No, I wonder if that the sort of blockbuster approach is part of the whole change we've had in the way we watch TV, we listen to music. There's just so much of it that only a few things can really break through the noise. So we have those kind of the huge box sets that everybody watches and everybody talks about, and they may watch them on all sorts of different devices at all sorts of different times, but because of that sort of fracturing of the market, something has to have a really huge marketing budget behind it or a huge word of mouth campaign behind it in order to get it to break through.
Yeah, I think these things have become sort of tribal, haven't they? It's a function of social media in that some things just become hot and all it takes is like enough people, you reach a tipping point, you hit an equilibrium, and suddenly it is the thing. Like Breaking Bad, for example. Or I mean, there must be lots of shows of a similar ilk that just sink without a trace, but a few of them just go absolutely viral. And I don't know if that's the same with the musicals, but it seems like it seems similar. It seems like a similar feel.
And probably the technology behind how you book tickets has fueled it as well, because if you were having to queue up in the street, you wouldn't get that demand. But even if you're having to make a phone call, I feel that's just a little bit more of a barrier than if you can go online and just couldn't keep clicking
there's literally
away,
that 1 minute
refresh.
it's going to sell. Yeah. And actually, I think those people sort of complaining on social media that they haven't got tickets speaks to the fact that when they do get a ticket, in a way, going to see the show isn't the point. The point is to tell everyone.
I think viral musical is a really good way of describing it. And this is the thing. A show like Half a Sixpence is getting amazing reviews, particularly Charlie Stemp in the lead role that was originally played by Tommy Steele. But that's not going to go viral. It's not going to be a Twitter hit. It relies on old-fashioned marketing, and that's never going to draw the same level of media attention. So,
is it just about capturing the zeitgeist then? Because Half a Sixpence and Showboat, frankly, their target audience is literally dying off, isn't it? Not to be cruel, but essentially that's your average age of someone who's going to be really wanting a ticket for that is probably about 75, 80. Obviously, something like Hamilton and the Book of Mormon is kind of aimed at millennials, basically, isn't it? And 'twas always thus, wasn't it? I mean, they're restaging Rent at the moment. That's a good musical.
Which was the original.
But it's 20 years ago now, and it doesn't have the same,
No, people would sleep on the streets
the 90s.
outside the Broadway production for return tickets. So, I mean, that was probably the first example.
I think Hamilton in particular, though, speaks to exactly what's going on in the world now. I mean, you look at the state of America, you've got the Black Lives Matter campaign, you've got Donald Trump coming in. These are issues that are addressed by Hamilton, which I understand has got an entirely non-white cast. And
there's a line in the show, immigrants, we get the job done, which gets a standing ovation on Broadway every night, apparently.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that feeds in very nicely to the way America is at the moment. So obviously that gives it a bump that Showboat perhaps doesn't.
But the irony is, of course, whilst it's celebrating the role of immigrants, actually most people who can afford $8,000 for a ticket are going to be white middle class professionals, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true. But they have made a lot of outreach initiatives for the US production. They've had lots of school children come in with free tickets from low-income neighborhoods in New York. And I think they may be planning. There are some dates that you can't book for in the UK one. I suspect they might be trying to do something similar there. But yeah, it's obviously a show about working class people, about immigrants, about people of colour, which is being viewed largely by a middle class white audience. And if the composition of the audience in the West End production is like most other West End shows, I can't see that being any different in London.
No. Well, in the tradition of every blockbuster musical, we're going to finish with the showstopper. Holden, what's your story of the week?
I've got this little ray of sunshine from an American political pundit.
Let's make it 20 seconds. Your trip to Italy, what did you learn about pasta? You're on the clock. Go.
So I actually thought a lot about the downfall of Western civilization.
Great.
Because Italy is a place where, you have seen peaks and valleys, shall we say, in the tides of civilizations. And it sounds stupid, but as an American, I never really thought about that before. What if the year the first wasn't the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if that was the peak of America, right? We had a cool
You're halfway
phone.
through your allotted time and you haven't said the word pasta.
I just really want to vouch for Roman pasta dishes.
Wait, so you're saying that the invention of pasta was the peak of Rome? Is that what parallel you're trying to draw?
The Roman Empire, the Renaissance, I mean, the U.S. has had a good run.
Nate Silver there on the 538 Politics podcast. Holden, we had to talk about the inauguration of Trump on this week's show, but you've chosen this clip of one of America's top political pundits saying we've reached a peak in liberal democracy and civilization. Explain why.
I want to stand up for politics as a way of making the world a better place. And I think that the election of Donald Trump and, to a certain extent, Brexit as well, the mechanisms by which we end up avoiding a worse political threat in the future. So there's certainly risk involved in giving Trump the presidency. There's risk involved in Brexit too, although that seems less likely to end in nuclear war, which I suppose is a good thing. But to take the Brexit argument first, which is probably the easier one, there clearly were a lot of people in the UK who felt that they had been ignored by both of the major political parties for a long time. And now they're clearly being listened to. Their fears are being digested by the machine of government. And although I don't share the worries that they have about immigration and about other matters, I do think it's much healthier that those anxieties are not only listened to but also responded to. That doesn't mean that they win every argument and that they get their own way.
Right, but what Nate Silver was saying is, fine, that's democracy, but it's also not progressive. You know, the society was heading in a certain direction and then you just put a spanner in the works.
Yeah.
Can that be a good thing?
I think it's a correction, and it's probably a necessary correction in order to maintain enough unity within a population that they will entrust their lives essentially to a government. You know, I'm not entirely happy with there's the quote that Barack Obama's recently used about the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice, and I'd sort of slightly back away from that because that makes it sound preordained and sort of inevitable, and I don't think there's
but Trump is going to be the greatest job creation president that God ever created.
I'm not sure that's what Obama had in mind when he said it, but you know, clearly there are huge setbacks, and you know the fall of the Roman Empire, the sort of post-Renaissance collapse. Progress clearly isn't linear, but I think that there needs to be a mechanism for the sorts of forces that could otherwise lead to the collapse of a government, the collapse of a system, for them to be incorporated into the system. That's what we can sort of sense Brexit doing at the moment, with the way Theresa May is trying to kind of keep everybody happy, keep moving forward, keep a sense of politics as a viable system. Trump, it's harder to see how he's going to do that, but I do hope there are enough grown-ups in Congress, enough checks and balances that whatever Trump brings to the table will somehow be incorporated into a liberal democracy, and the liberal democracy will survive at the end of it.
I suppose the danger is if you incorporate too much rather than putting into action what he's actually campaigned and said he's going to do. If you try and incorporate it into liberal values, as you say, then the people who voted for him, who felt they were being listened to, might feel that they're not, that it's all just become the same again, that it didn't make any difference.
On a slightly different note, I think in Plato's Republic, it is claimed that democracy actually is a precursor of tyranny, because freedoms become so great that you need someone to rein it all in. And it's almost uncanny, you know, what's happening in America would appear to be that actually unfolding. But of course, you know, there are lots of people who've tried to predict what happens in politics, Lenin, Marx, people like that, and usually they're wrong. So it will be interesting to see what happens. But whatever happens will be a progression. To argue that it's a backward step to your view it might be, but it will in terms of humankind it will be a progression.
Well, it will be time moving on, won't it?
Yes,
I mean, if you take a specific issue,
the people who are born in 2 generations' time will deal with the hand that they've been dealt, and they will push it forward.
Okay, I don't imagine that Trump is going to do anything much to change the abortion laws in America, let's say, but in order to win the election, he had to go out and make himself look like he was very much pro-lifer, even though clearly he's from New York and has had plenty of girlfriends, and I'm sure there may be people he knows that have had abortions along that line. You know, so he has to make a case for things that actually, almost however you look at it, isn't progressive. Like if those things came into action, they wouldn't be progressive, would they? If you are born into a country where abortion is possible and then you grow up and it isn't, is that progressive? Is there any argument for saying that's progressive?
I think this question depends a lot on the perspective you take, so how close you are to the decisions being made, or whether you're looking back at them. So if you look back at the last sort of 30, 40 years of history, either in Britain or America, you've essentially seen an alternation between left-wing and right-wing governments of various descriptions. But usually they don't erase the legacy of the former administration. They accept some policies and change others. There's generally been an acceptance of whatever progress has been made on the social front. And it seems very unlikely that Trump is going to throw out gay marriage. Theresa May seems determined not to throw out social protection for jobs.
What about environmental protection? I mean, that's something that Trump has said he wants to change.
If he does change that, and there have already been suggestions from some of his appointees.
Well, he said he's going to shut down funding for climate science, for example.
Yes. Whether we can take Trump at his word, I think, is a really difficult question there. I mean, if he does shut down funding, that will certainly be a step back for the sort of progressive cause. But he doesn't have the final say. You know, he may only be in office for 4 years. If he prompts a reaction in the other direction. It may be that whoever follows him ends up spending a lot more on climate research, or that other countries around the world decide that they want to step in and fill the gap.
And with that, this week's edition of The Week Unwrapped has come to an end. My thanks to Jonathan Harwood, Rebecca Gillie and Holden Frith. For more from The Week, do visit theweek.co.uk, download The Weekday, which is our free iPhone app, or of course subscribe to the magazine. And don't forget to subscribe to this to hear brand new episodes of The Week Unwrapped as soon as they're available via iTunes, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, basically wherever you get your podcasts, delivered straight to your smartphone for free. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer is Sam Bonham at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.